Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Simpson. There are a lot of reasons to take care of the trees and shrubs that you've planted in your yard and home landscape. First, you've made an investment, so you want them to last. Further, trees and shrubs are not only aesthetically pleasing, they also provide shade and wind protection, and they're important habitat for all kinds of wildlife. So this afternoon, we're going to learn about some common problems to watch for and how to control them in our trees and landscape plants. Joining me are Leonard Perry from the University of Vermont and Vijay Komai from Bartlett Tree Experts. Now, this is very timely. Thanks so much for coming in. Leonard, what will we be looking at today?
Okay, we've got about a half dozen really important pests and problems on trees and shrubs. Ones that I've seen, I have a couple from my own landscape, ones that Vijay sees almost every day working with clients around the region. And Vijay will be talking about the symptoms to watch for. We'll be talking about that, the life cycle, and how to control these. And then at the end, we'll actually mention an important pest of people.
Okay. Well, so Vijay, on the program earlier in the spring, you highlighted issues like selecting the right tree, the proper way to plant them, to make for healthier trees. That's critical.
It is. Properly planted trees that aren't experiencing any stresses are less prone to insect and disease problems.
What are some of the common mistakes people make when they plant a tree?
Planting too deep is a big one. Improper aftercare, over mulching, not keeping the tree well watered through the establishment period. All these sorts of things play a part in stressing the tree and making it more prone to insect and disease issues.
And I think, one of the key things too is choosing the right plant. Some of these, especially with diseases, are more resistant, whether it's species or cultivars. We'll give examples of both of those.
Okay. Well, it's a sad sight to see blue spruces. I know you have an issue with one of yours.
Yeah, and Vijay, why don't you start us off talking about this one that you see a lot.
Blue spruce are a common plant in the landscape. People love the blue color, very prominent in residential landscapes, and really prominent problem on these trees with a needle cast disease. It's actually a fungus disease that causes a thinning of the tree over time from the bottom up. Once a tree is infected, older needles on the inner part of the tree are infected, discolor, and are cast the following year. So it progresses up the tree. You can see the photo up on the screen there. You see how thin the lower canopy of that tree is.
Right.
If you were to look closely at the needles under a microscope or even under a good hand lens, you would see those black dots, which are actually the fruiting bodies of the fungus. The blue spruce in particular are highly susceptible. Planting large groupings of them too close together or shearing your trees so they have a very dense canopy promotes a problem because we don't have good airflow and good light penetration, much more moist environment, which is conducive to the growth of the fungus. We could plant other spruces in place of blue spruces. We won't get that blue effect, but Norway spruce particularly is very resistant to this disease, and white spruce is pretty resistant.
What can you do once your tree's infected like that?
Well, the only option is a treatment with a fungicide. And clients need to understand that once this disease is in there, you're going to be treating it every year because it is so prevalent in the landscape. And it's a fungicide treatment, typically 3 applications a year, the first one beginning about now when the new growth, new needles are elongating, and then it's followed up by 2 subsequent treatments about a month apart.
Sounds expensive.
It is expensive, and I would encourage people to stay away from the blue spruce. They're not indigenous to this area. They're indigenous to the west, which is a high, dry, arid environment, the mountains of the west, so they don't like our humidity.
So it's really important to do your homework on what tree you pick.
Correct.
Good examples you mentioned are ones in my own landscape, which I brought a couple of pictures of, the kind of before and after.
Right.
Back in 2007, first picture will show, seeing the left is the blue spruce with the needles. Just note, and it's just finished blooming now, that same rhododendron there, the pink one. But then 10 years later, this spring, you can see all the needles are gone basically, and you just have that skeleton. There are some up near the top. Eventually we'll have to take this down. The birds still love to perch in it and so forth, but it's totally changed the landscape, opened it up. For years it actually came in on another one. I think I actually brought it to spores in on bark mulch, which I quit after that. But I would spray it with a backpack sprayer, shooting up copper spray, you know, an organic thing, as VJ mentioned 3 times, but finally it just kind of gave up. It was kind of an endless battle. I held it at bay for a while. Right next to them are 2 Norway spruces, not affected at all, just as VJ said.
Interesting. Now, I understand the next issue is actually a pest on a common tree in our landscape.
Right. Correct. The bronze birch borer, and I think we have photos of that. Our native paper birch, very commonly planted tree and native in the native woodlands, very prone to a boring insect. It's a small beetle that bores in or lays eggs high in the canopy under bark crevices or in crotches of twigs, and the larvae hatch and burrow in to the tree and essentially girdle the tree from the inside out.
Oh my.
So the larvae feed for about 2 years. Typically it's a 2-year life cycle, and on the photo on the right you see these sort of raised ribs from underneath the bark, and that's actually the galleries of the larvae feeding in there and encircling the tree and destroying the vascular tissue. After about 2 years, they emerge as adults, and on the left, you see this very distinct D-shaped exit hole, like a capital D. It can be oriented in any direction. You can see the size of it. There's a key there to show the relative size. And what you'll typically see is you'll start to see a dieback in the crown of the tree. You'll see branches wilting and dying back in the crown, and you know you have an infestation. You look for these ribs on the tree. That's also a telltale sign, and the exit holes as well. So again, trees that are under stress are far more prone to this insect. You know, our native paper birch likes a very moist, cool environment. We put it out in the middle of a lawn in full sun. You have drought stress, you know, competition with turf, put stresses on the trees, the insects move in. So the best thing we can do for our birches is keep them healthy. Fertilization, keep them well watered during drought times. But there are also birches more commonly planted now in the landscape that are resistant to this disease, and that would be river birch, monarch birch, or the Japanese white birch. Little different ornamental features, but not susceptible to this insect.
Now, the next problem to explore is a disease that looks like it comes from a horror movie.
Yeah, this is one we've actually shown before, but you can give quickly the, you know, gist of it again.
We're talking about cedar apple rust here. Very common disease, common on members of the Rosaceae family, which includes apples, flowering crab apples, serviceberry, and a number of others. The interesting thing about this disease, it's a fungus disease that to complete its life cycle needs an alternate host. And that alternate host is our native red cedar, not the arborvitae or white cedar, but the red cedar, common native plant, but also used in landscapes. You can see in this photo here, in front of the house to the left of the pillar there is a red cedar, and those are crab apples out front. This client was having a problem with this disease. She's got the alternate host there. It spends part of its life cycle on the cedar. The photo we showed before, you see the spots on the leaves. There's galls that form on the cedar, and when they're hydrated in the spring, right conditions, very wet, moist conditions, right temperatures, they explode and form those orange teleal horns that release spores that are then transferred by wind to the crabapple, infect the crabapple. Those spots on the crabapple then later in the season develop fruiting bodies where spores are released, go back to the cedar, and the life cycle continues.
That's amazing. So you really have to know what you're doing when you're combining plants too.
Yes.
Again, just choosing some of these newer resistant varieties of the apples is good. And the next problem, there really aren't, well, there are some resistant, I guess, with the boxwood leaf miner. You get some species that aren't as prone to that. So.
Yep, boxwoods, again, a very common landscape plant. People use them as hedges, use them around patios, lining walkways. And we're seeing a lot of boxwood leaf miner this year.
I think we've got some pictures of that we want to take a look at.
The boxwood leaf miner is a tiny gnat. It's almost like a mosquito. And the adult lays an egg in the leaf, larvae hatch, and they feed between the layers of the leaf, weakening the plant. You get discoloration. You see this bumpy appearance on the leaves. On the left, you can see the adults swarming there. And then if you pull apart the leaf layers, you can clearly see those little orange larvae feeding in there.
So let's talk again about another pest, which I've seen around my house, tent caterpillars.
Oh, the tent caterpillars.
Yeah.
They're starting to appear now. There's eastern tent caterpillar and forest tent caterpillar.
Right.
It's a moth that lays an egg mass on the twigs, and we have photos of that egg mass. You would see these in the winter, the egg mass on the left up in the corner there, sort of metallic-y looking, kind of encompasses a twig, maybe the diameter of a pencil. And if you were to see these in the winter or late winter and you prune them out, you get rid of the problem. When these larvae hatch from there, they swarm, they form this nest on the tree, and the larvae then, the caterpillars then crawl out and begin defoliating your tree. Typically, unless it's a real bad infestation, they're not going to kill the tree. Very unsightly. You can prune out these nests and destroy them or pull them out with a glove on your hand and get rid of them. Not much fun. But do not try to burn them out with a torch.
Right.
People do that and they end up injuring their tree. So
You end up burning the tree, and so you have no tree.
Okay, well, what's next? It's not a pest or a disease, but it's common in landscapes in Vermont.
yeah, this is something we're seeing more and more. It's actually, if we put up the photo here, there's herbicide damage. This was on a client's property that I saw just a couple weeks ago. You can see a tree on the right there, very close proximity to a bluestone path. And the homeowner treated the weeds coming up in the path with an herbicide, commonly sold in all our garden centers and home improvement stores, hardware stores. And the problem here was that it contains long-term weed control. This was Roundup 325, which is an extended control, and the products in it were absorbed into the soil where fine roots from these trees and close landscape plants were growing, and it was absorbed into the root system, and in some cases it killed the plants.
Amazing. So you have to really
one
be
of the
careful.
things, so you might, and it's a very common problem, but I brought a picture of something I saw and I thought, oh, we should show this. It's actually aphid damage on a shrub. This on one of the shrubby dogwoods. You see kind of the gnarled foliage. It's not as elongated, but if you look close, that stem on the right side, the bottom is bare, but the top is covered. That's crawling with aphids, and there were also ants, because the ants were going for the honeydew secretion of the aphids. So if you see the ants and you look close at aphids, that gnarled foliage, you can just prune that out. You can just use some sort of organic spray to knock down the aphids. But that's different from the herbicide damage, which is, again, a very common problem that with these weed and feed products.
Right.
Keep them away from anywhere near trees, where there are trees. Ask if you have a lawn care company what they're using, and to keep them away from trees.
And read the labels.
Okay, before we go, got to talk about ticks.
Yeah,
Bad year.
Yeah, bad year for those. I don't know if you have any quick thoughts on that, VJ.
Yeah, the ticks it's a super bad year for ticks. Ticks do not reside in your mowed lawn. They like a moist environment, cool environment, in the leaf matter, in the brushy areas, along the edges of your property, reducing habitat, getting rid of brush piles, debris piles, and, being vigilant about checking yourself for ticks.
And I know, Leonard, you have more
I
information
do
too.
on my website, Perry's Perennial Pages. I always give a lot of articles there on a lot of these topics, including the ticks.
All right, well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
That's our program for today. I'm Judy Simpson. I'll see you again next time on Across the Fence.